Aster Vale Forum hung above the upper gas bands of Nerith Prime, where the clouds looked calm from a distance and violent up close. The station was the ceremonial heart of the Galactic Council, built to host treaties, trials, and public victories. On this day it held two clear sides. The Council had come to force terms, and Earth had come to stop those terms from becoming a final sentence. Silas Wren stood in the arrival corridor with a diplomatic seal on his chest and a quiet face meant to calm hostile rooms. His public role was simple enough to survive a search, and simple enough to repeat for cameras. He was Earth's special envoy for conditional surrender talks. That was the role the station was allowed to see. If the treaty was signed as written, Earth's border colonies would be placed under Council military protection. The phrase sounded orderly until one listened closely. Protection meant occupation. It meant Council ships over human ports, Council officers over human routes, and Council control over who moved, who ate, and who answered for either. Silas already knew his first goals. Keep the signing from closing too quickly, and find Mira Selm before the station buried her completely. Mira was Earth Station Liaison, a logistics observer assigned to Aster Vale Forum 6 months earlier under a trade audit cover. Her signal had gone quiet 2 hours before the Council moved the signing ahead of schedule. That was too neat to be chance. If she was alive, she knew why the ceremony had been rushed, and if she was dead, then someone wanted Earth blind before the treaty locked into place. The escort drones drifted ahead of him in polite formation. The corridor around him was too bright and too empty for a normal diplomatic arrival. He noted the missing attendants first, then the sealed side doors, and then the reflection of armored boots in a polished wall panel just before the guards stepped into view. Council security wore ceremonial black when cameras were near. These guards wore matte gray field armor under long coats. That told him enough. The station expected resistance before the pen touched the table. Dana Ilian, chief legal counsel for the Earth delegation, fell in a step beside him. They moved the time again, she said. How far? 17 minutes. Silas kept his pace steady. That is not a schedule. Change. That is a trap. She had already reached the same conclusion. Neither of them said more. They passed through a pressure arch and entered the Hall of Accord, where the Council liked to dress power in polished stone and soft music. The circular chamber was framed by tall view panels that showed the bronze cloud tops of Nerith Prime rolling far below. At the center waited a treaty table too narrow for comfort and designed that way on purpose. One side held the Council delegation, and the other held only 2 chairs for Earth. Silas saw the cameras, the witness drones, and the armed men pretending not to be armed. Then he saw the man near the inner door. Station Security Director Turin Voss stood with one hand behind his back and the other resting on a data slate he had no reason to hold during a treaty ceremony. He was tall, spare, and perfectly composed. His expression carried the practiced courtesy of a man who had spent years making pressure look like order. He seemed calm enough to reassure a room, which was exactly why he was dangerous. Envoy Wren, he said, Aster Vale Forum welcomes Earth in good faith. Silas returned the nod. Then your station has an unusual definition of hospitality. Voss's eyes moved once toward the field armor guards near the rear wall, then back to Silas. The Council has received threats. From whom? If we knew that with certainty, I would be less busy. The answer was smooth. The timing was not. Voss wanted Earth to feel isolated before the signing began. He wanted pressure in a room before any document was touched. A clerk approached with a document crystal and a witness pad. The first chamber has approved accelerated review. The signing will begin in 9 minutes. Donna Stethant. 9. The Council believes delay would invite instability. Silas looked toward the witness platform and noticed something small and wrong. One place marker had been removed from the Earth side. Not a seat. A name strip. Mira Selm's observer slot had been wiped clean, as if she had never been assigned to the chamber at all. That was the first hard proof that this had moved beyond procedure. He turned to Voss. Your registry changed without notifying our delegation. Voss smiled faintly. Clerical corrections happen on fast days. Only when someone is erasing a person. The smile did not move. Careful, envoy. Suspicion tends to sound louder in chambers built for history. Silas stepped toward the table as if he accepted the rules of the room. In truth, he had changed the rules in his own head. He was no longer here only to delay a bad treaty. Now he had to buy minutes, locate Mira, and keep a path open before the station sealed around him. The ceremony began with words no one in the chamber believed. Order, stability, shared duty, and collective peace. The council speaker read the terms with the solemn tone of a man blessing a grave. Silas listened only for useful details while Dana burned time in public. The treaty language was broad by design. Council fleet oversight, temporary advisory command, and emergency relief authority all sounded clean enough to hide conquest inside procedure. Dana objected to a transport clause, then an inspection clause, then a jurisdiction clause. She was doing her job well, and every objection cost the chamber time. Silas used that time for something else. While Dana kept the argument alive in public, he kept tracking the room, the doors, the guards, and the station logic beneath them. Then the room changed again. Guards repositioned near the lower exits, and Voss glanced at his slate and thumbed 2 silent commands. The chamber music cut for half a second, just enough to reveal the click of internal locks cycling somewhere under the floor. The council had started closing the station before the signing was complete. Silas kept his hands flat on the table. Inside his right sleeve, a thin receiver patch vibrated once against his wrist, then came 3 slower taps. Alive. Lower service tier. South maintenance spine. Mira. Dana noticed the brief shift in his eyes and kept arguing without looking at him. Earth cannot accept unilateral enforcement language under a protection framework. That clause voids the term protection by its own wording. The record is already sufficient, the speaker said. Then the record is about to become useful, Dana replied. Silas lowered his gaze and touched the edge of the witness pad with one finger. Not to sign yet, but to wake the contact, mesh hidden in its frame. Earth had helped calibrate parts of Aster Vale's freight balancing system years ago through civilian contracts. Those contracts had ended. The architecture had not. He only needed a first touch to mark the local network and cue a dormant request. It was a quiet move, but it mattered because if he had to leave the chamber fast, he would need the station already listening. The mesh took the mark and vanished again. Silas kept his face still. Then the speaker rose. The council sees no value in further delay. Envoy Wren stepped forward and confirmed the preliminary accord. Preliminary accord, not a final signature. The wording was narrow, and that narrowness mattered. If Silas refused too early, the council would close around Earth at once. If he accepted too broadly, they would claim consent and bury the rest under procedure. He stepped forward, read only the top strip, and signed the narrow acknowledgement line that recognized receipt of terms, but not full ratification. It was the smallest concession that kept the ceremony alive. The council wanted more than that. Earth had given less than it seemed. At the exact moment the stylist left the pad, his hidden contact, Mesh, sent its first quiet request into the station's freight net. Not sabotage, not yet. A route ping, a door priority map, and a first question asked to an old buried architecture. Voss understood some part of it. Silas saw it in the way the security director turned slightly toward the lower corridor instead of the diplomatic lifts. The council welcomes wisdom, the speaker said for the cameras. Silas met his gaze. Beginnings are the easy part. He did not leave the chamber at once. Instead, he forced the pace back into procedure while Dana kept objecting. Clarification on witness sequencing. Clarification on customs authority. Clarification on cargo arbitration. Behind the performance, Silas waited for the network map to return. When it came, it arrived as a warm flicker beneath the patch at his wrist. South maintenance spine. Service detention block. Access above a coolant relay. Mira was not in a legal holding cell. She was hidden in infrastructure. Silas leaned toward Dana. They have Mira below service tier. Alive. For now. How bad? Bad enough that we stop pretending this ends at the table. She gave one small nod and rose. The Earth delegation requests immediate review of witness integrity. An assigned observer has been removed from the chamber registry without bilateral notice. The room tightened. Clerks looked at each other, and Voss took a single step toward the center. There is no basis for disruption, he said. Then show the full access log, Dana replied. That forced him to choose. If he refused, he exposed fear, and if he agreed, he opened time he did not want to open. He refused. Security records are restricted during active threat review. Dana turned so the chamber could hear her. Then let the record show the council is demanding jurisdiction over human colonies while withholding custody information on human personnel inside this very station. Several clerks stopped writing. Good. Let them hear it. Let them remember the order in which things happened. At that same moment, every door marker in the Hall of Accord shifted from pale white to locked amber. The speaker glanced at Voss, annoyed rather than surprised. Director? A precaution, Voss said. We have indications of an internal breach. Not detention. Controlled zones. The polite term for capture before paperwork. Silas drew a slow breath. Myra's signal had already changed his priority, and the locked doors confirmed the rest. Dana was now keeping the chamber tangled on purpose. Silas's job had shifted. He was done buying time for diplomacy alone. He had to get below the hall, reach Mira, and do it before Voss closed the lower service tiers around her. You moved too early, he said quietly. Voss frowned. Excuse me? You were meant to wait until we gave you the final signature. Then Silas moved. He caught the witness pad, snapped its base free, and drove it across the control strip near his hand. The chamber lights dipped. Not out, just enough to break the lock sequence and trigger a systems check in 3 adjoining sectors. Dana shoved the treaty crystal into the path of a guard reaching for her. It shattered across the floor and brought confusion. South corridor, Silas said. Dana did not ask why. She already knew enough. They broke from the ceremonial line as alarms began to build. 2 guards cut across the chamber. Silas took the first one low and used the man's own momentum to throw him into a witness stand. The second reached for a stunner, but Dana slammed a chair into his arm and sent the weapon skidding under the table. Voss touched his slate once. Seal inner transit. Track Ren. No public feed. Now it was open. Not diplomacy, not procedure. A hunt. Silas reached the service door hidden behind the wall seam and tore the emergency cover from the latch. His network mark had already downgraded the local lock priority for half a breath. Half a breath was enough. The seal released with a hard metallic snap. Cooler air rushed from the shaft beyond. Dana stopped at the threshold. I can hold the chamber for maybe 5 seconds. I do not need 5. You are getting them anyway. She turned back before he could answer and hurled the chamber's legal recorder into the path of the advancing guards. It burst in a spray of light and noise. That bought the break he needed. Dana stayed behind to drag the room back into delay, noise, and public confusion while he went down after Mira. Silas slipped through the service door and dropped into the narrow maintenance stair beneath the Hall of Accord. Below him, the hidden levels of the station waited. He was heading down for one reason first. Reach Mira before Voss sealed the lower service tiers around her. The maintenance stair beneath the Hall of Accord dropped through layers the public never saw. The polished stone and ceremonial lighting were gone. Here the walls were ribbed metal, the air was cooler, and every sound seemed to come from inside the station's bones. Pumps throbbed behind sealed plates. Freight motors hummed far below, and thin strips of service light ran along the floor like a dim trail through a machine that no longer trusted its own workers. Silas moved fast, but not recklessly. Speed meant nothing if it brought half the station down on him. He kept one hand on the inner rail and counted each landing as he descended. South maintenance spine, service detention block, access above a coolant relay. That was all the signal patch had given him, and it was enough. The stairwell panel on the next landing displayed a line that read, Restricted movement order extended to service sectors 3 through 9. So Voss was not guessing. He was closing layers in sequence. Silas stopped one level below the panel and listened. He heard boots above him, not many but disciplined. No shouting, no panique. Voss had sent trained people, not a flood of bodies. A frightened guard made noise, and a confident one took angles and waited. He crossed the junction hatch into a lateral access corridor just before the First team reached the stair. The corridor was barely shoulder-wide and crowded with conduit lines on both sides. His diplomatic coat snagged on a bracket, and he stripped it off without hesitation. Down here, rank was only weight. At the far end, a camera turret rotated toward him with slow mechanical patience. Silas slid behind a coolant manifold before the lens could settle. The camera paused, recalibrated, and resumed its sweep. He watched the pattern twice, then pulled a maintenance latch loose and sent a spray of vapor across the corridor. The mist turned the lens opaque for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was enough for him to pass under it and reach the next door. He keyed the emergency release and entered a freight service hall that ran beneath the south ring. This was one of the station's working arteries, not a ceremonial space. Food, medical stock, pressure seals, docking allocation, atmosphere balancing, and waste routing all moved through this lower network. The council could speak about order above the clouds, but the station stayed alive because these hidden levels kept every section fed and synchronized. If Earth had once helped build buried routing into that system, then the council had a secret problem far worse than a delayed treaty. Their center of power rested on machinery they did not fully control. A voice came over a wall speaker, calm and close enough to feel personal. Envoy Ren, you have entered a restricted support zone. Remain where you are, and station security will guarantee your safety. Silas kept walking. He did not waste breath on the lie. Another speaker activated farther ahead. You are now endangering every delegate under this roof. The council can still describe this as confusion. Do not force me to describe it as intent. Voss again. Never raised, never rushed. The voice of a man who believed he still owned the pace of the room. Silas turned into a maintenance bay and crouched beside a line of cargo sleds locked to a magnetic track. He finally answered, not because he wanted conversation, but because he wanted Voss measuring the wrong thing. If you wanted safety, he said toward the nearest speaker, you would not have erased Mira's sound from your chamber registry. A short silence followed. Then Voss replied, names disappear every day from systems that correct themselves. Only when someone is afraid of a witness. This time the silence was longer. Good. Let Voss wonder how much Earth already knew, and how much Mira might still have told him. Silas found the next route marker painted beside an access ladder. Coolant relay south. Detention support. That matched the signal trace. He climbed down into a lower duct passage, then dropped into a junction chamber where 4 service tunnels met around a humming relay core. The chamber was empty for half a second. Then a figure stepped from behind the relay housing and fired a stun line across the narrow space. Silas moved on instinct. He threw himself against the wall as the charge flashed past his shoulder and cracked against a pipe mount. The shooter advanced at once, not hesitating and not waiting for reinforcements. Voss had sent people who trusted their own hands. The officer wore service armor without unit markings. Smart. No visible insignia meant deniability later. Silas kicked a loose maintenance case into the officer's path, forcing the man to shift his footing. That tiny break in rhythm was enough. Silas stepped inside the next strike, trapped the weapon arm, and drove the officer against the relay shell. The stun unit dropped. The officer reached for a blade tool instead of backing off. Not ceremonial and not soft. Silas slammed the man's forearm into the housing until the tool fell, then pinned him there with his own shoulder. Where is she? The officer looked at him with real contempt. Too late. No answer. Boots sounded in the upper passage, more than one set. Silas released the officer with a hard shove into the relay bank and grabbed the fallen stun unit. He did not keep it. He fired once into the overhead light instead. The chamber plunged into uneven shadow, and he slipped through the detention support tunnel while the men above adjusted to darkness. That brief fight told him what he needed. Voss's people were not there to posture. They were there to cut him off in layers, fast and quiet. If he slowed, the station would fold around him one sealed corridor at a time. The detention support corridor curved around the base of the south maintenance spine and ended at 3 holding rooms hidden behind a coolant service array. They were not official cells. No window strips. No prupe registi ade. Just reinforced doors, internal restraints, and heavy. Power feeds. Voss had buried Mira where only station hands and security teams would ever look. Silas checked the first room and found it empty. The second held crates of medical stock and a portable scanner cart. The third door showed a heartbeat trace on the outer maintenance display. Weak but steady. He opened it. Mira's own was sitting on the floor with one arm restrained to a wall ring and a compression band around her ribs. Her dark hair was damp against her forehead. One side of her face was bruised, but her eyes were clear the moment she saw him. "You took your time," she said. Silas crouched beside the restraint lock. "You are still rude. That helps. It means I am alive." He broke the wall coupling with a maintenance pry bar instead of trying to crack the code clean. Faster. The ring tore loose from the bracket, leaving a short section of metal still around her wrist. When he touched the compression band, she caught his hand. "Do not waste the med stock yet. I can stand. We need the relay path." Silas studied her for half a second. Breathing shallow, guarded movement on the left side. Not dying. Not fast either. He helped her up. "Why are you here?" "Because the council did not pull the treaty forward just to own the border colonies. They panicked." "About what?" "This station." She nodded toward the corridor outside. "The Forum depends on a shadow freight layer," she said. "You remember the old civilian contracts?" "I remember them. Those contracts were never stripped out. Earth built balancing routes into the service net years ago. Quiet routes, backup load sharing, and emergency bypasses." Silas already understood the danger. He needed the exact edge. Mira gave it to him. The council expanded the station around that buried layer because rebuilding was more expensive than admitting the old layers still mattered. They tell everyone Aster Vale is sovereign infrastructure. It is not completely. She saw that he was already ahead and simplified it further. The shadow freight layer is the old hidden logistics skeleton under the station. Earth helped build it, and the council still needs it to keep part of the Forum running. That mattered because power on the station still depended on a buried system Earth had helped design. If that truth came out, the council would look weaker than it could afford. Silas said it plainly. If word gets out, every outer block sees vulnerability. "Yes," Mira said, "and the council loses the image of total control it uses to keep everyone in line." She steadied herself against the wall. "That is why they rushed the treaty. They wanted our signature first. Then they would bury the evidence and blame any systems breach on us." So there it was. The first real layer of the secret. The council did not only want Earth's submission. They wanted silence around the fact that the most important station in their system of power still rested on logistics pathways Earth had helped design and could still influence. Silas took a pressure patch from the medical crate and pressed it into Myra's hand. "Use this now." She obeyed without protest. That worried him more than the wound. "They questioned you about the freight net?" he asked. "Not at first. They thought I was tracking votes. Then someone above station security came down and changed the script. They kept asking who on Earth still knew the lower routes were live. Do they know about me? I told them you were a man with good manners and bad timing." A faint shadow of a smile touched his face and vanished. He checked the corridor again. "Can you move?" "Not fast. Can you keep going if it hurts?" Mira met his eyes. "You did not come down here to ask that." That truth needed no speech around it. He had come because she mattered to the mission, and because he was not built to leave his people buried inside an enemy station. With Mira, every turn would take longer, every gap would narrow, and every mistake would hit harder. Leaving her had ceased to be an option before he ever saw the cell. A wall speaker activated outside the room. "Envoy Wren," Voss said, "you have found the wrong person in the wrong place." Silas stepped into the corridor with Mira behind him. "Then you buried her in the wrong cell." Voss ignored the line. "The lower sectors are now sealed in rings. There are no clean exits left." Mira looked at Silas. "He is closing us inward." She was right. Voss was not sweeping them randomly. He was shaping the map, shutting the short routes, and forcing them toward zones built for easy control. That was how a good hunter worked in a machine like this. He used the station itself as the trap. They left the detention block by a supply lane that ran beneath the coolant relay chambers. Silas chose it because it was narrow, ugly, and not meant for prestige traffic. That usually meant weaker oversight and fewer fixed checkpoints. The problem was that Voss knew the same thing. At the next junction, the floor markers for 3 adjoining lift routes switched from green to amber at once. Then the side doors slammed shut one after another with heavy magnetic thuds. "He just killed a short path," Mira said. "He wants us at the freight core. That is where he can seal the bulk doors." Silas stopped long enough to pull a route map from a maintenance terminal. Every easy route from South Service toward the outer docking ring was closing in sequence. Voss was not herding them toward the nearest exit. He was herding them into a dead zone between freight lifts and coolant trunks, a place with little public oversight and strong control doors. They could not leave the station now by any clean line. That option had ended. Silas looked at Mira. "We're done trying to get out first." She understood at once. "We touched the freight net. If we do not, he strangles every sector ahead of us." That was the reset. They were no longer trying to slip out before the station closed. Now the immediate goal was to reach the hidden logistics network, reopen movement, and stop Voss from squeezing them down one compartment at a time until there was nowhere left to run. The route Silas chose next was worse than the ones Voss had sealed. It cut through a maintenance trench near the transport core, where suspended freight rails crossed above a deep service shaft and every wall vibrated with cargo timing. If security caught them there would be little cover and few side exits. But Voss would assume an injured prisoner and a diplomat on the run would avoid the most exposed path. Sometimes the dangerous route bought the only surprise left. They crossed a narrow catwalk over the shaft, while freight sleds hissed through hidden channels below. Myra's steps slowed. Silas took more of her weight without comment. Behind them, a door cycled open. Flashlights cut through the dim glow. "Contact in Trench 6, a guard called." Silas pulled Mira behind a load-bearing column as a stun shot burst against the catwalk rail and threw pale sparks into the shaft. The security team did not rush blindly. They spread out and came forward by pairs, one covering while the other moved. Voss had chosen well. Silas waited until the lead pair committed to the column line. Then he hit the manual freight override beside his shoulder. A warning tone sounded. One loaded sled diverted unexpectedly across an upper transfer rail. The motion was not violent, but it was enough to force the advancing team to break formation and look up. In that heartbeat of confusion, Silas guided Mira across the catwalk to the far platform and kicked the release on a service ladder. The ladder dropped between the platform and the team behind them, turning one pursuit line into 2 slower ones. They kept moving. Voss came over the speakers again. "You are making this harder for the people who work here." Silas did not slow, then stop using them as cover. "You still think this is about a treaty." Silas filed that line away. Men in control did not usually correct their prey unless the truth already frightened them. The corridor ahead narrowed into a relay crawl and then opened into the outer edge of the transport core. Here the station felt less like architecture and more like a living engine. Cargo lifts moved in slow vertical columns. Docking assignments flashed across maintenance panels, and air pressure valves adjusted with deep, steady clicks. This was where the station fed itself. This was where movement could still be taken back. Mira pointed toward a recessed access panel near the base of a lift shaft. "There, old civilian relay. If they never rebuilt it, that is our first handhold." Silas led her down the last service ramp and knelt at the panel. The housing had been repainted twice, relabeled once, and forgotten by everyone except the people who knew what lay beneath it. He pried the cover loose. Inside sat a relay spine no council engineer would have chosen for beauty. It was ugly, compact, and practical. Old earthwork, built to keep moving freight when elegant systems failed. Boots sounded from both ends of the corridor. Mira leaned against the wall, pale but standing. "Tell me you can do something with it. I can wake it. Will that free us?" "No, but it will give us room to move, and it will prove this layer is still alive." He touched the contact, mesh hidden in his sleeve to the exposed ports. The patch warmed at once. The node recognized the old civilian handshake after a beat of resistance, like a half-buried memory, pulling itself awake. Silas sent the smallest command he could risk. Not control, just a redistribution pulse. The effect rolled through the transport core in less than 3 seconds. One freight lift halted between levels. 2 others moved early. Docking indicators in the corridor flickered out of sequence, and a belt of cargo sleds on the far wall slipped half a cycle off timing, forcing 3 bulk doors to reopen for safety clearance. It was not chaos. It was worse for the Council than chaos. It was proof that Earth still had fingers inside the Forum's hidden load paths, and it forced the station to reopen routes Voss had started to squeeze shut. Mira let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. That will get attention. That was the point. The corridor lights shifted to security red. Then a new voice came over the system, older, colder, and carrying none of Voss's careful patience. Director Voss, end this immediately. Silas looked up. Mira did too. They both understood the change at once. This was no longer a station matter being cleaned up below public notice. Someone higher had stepped in. The voice continued. Contain the lower sectors. Suspend public movement. Strip external observer access. I do not care what explanation is required. Voss answered on the same channel. Understood. That single exchange changed the meaning of everything around them. The Council had decided that preserving authority mattered more than preserving the appearance of law. Silas closed the relay panel halfway, not fully. He wanted it reachable again. At both ends of the corridor, security teams advanced into view. Mira pushed herself off the wall. What now? The station stops hiding how afraid it is. They ran for the upper lift spine before the converging teams could trap them in the open transport core. The transport core around them was still running, but not cleanly anymore. Freight lifts paused between levels. Bulk doors opened a second too long, then snapped shut too hard, and routing lights changed. Out of order along the service walls. It was not a collapse. It was a controlled distortion, the kind that made every corridor harder to trust and every command harder to enforce. Silas had pushed the station off perfect balance. Now both sides were moving inside a machine that was still alive, but no longer fully obedient. Security teams closed in from both ends of the corridor. Mira was upright, but barely. The pressure patch had steadied her breathing, not restored her strength. Silas looked left, then right, and made the choice before the guards could trap them in a firing lane. "We're going higher," he said. "The safe route is down through freight return," Mira replied. "The safe route is too slow." He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a narrow lift platform mounted beside the freight shaft. The panel was in local override after the relay pulse. He slapped the emergency lever, and the platform jerked upward with a protesting whine. A stun burst cracked against the frame below them. Another flashed past Myra's shoulder and burst against a steel brace. As the lift reached the upper service bridge, the panel at the entrance displayed a line that read communications priority restricted by Council authority. "That means they are already cutting broadcast access," Mira said. "Then we were right to come here." They stepped onto the bridge. Below them, the freight core rumbled and flashed with imperfect rhythm. Ahead stretched a steel walkway no more than 2 shoulders wide, running between relay housings, maintenance lockers, and the armored wall of the internal signal trunk. A voice rolled from the speaker grid above the bridge. "Envoy Wren, your actions are now degrading emergency services across multiple sectors." Silas did not look up. "Then stop chasing me through your own life support. You are confusing leverage with control." "No, I am reminding you that they are not the same thing." Warning shutters slid partway down over the far junction, not enough to seal it, but enough to narrow it into a kill gap. "If we stop, he pins us here," Mira said. "If we rush blind, he gets the same result." Silas spotted a service cable drum chained to the rail near a maintenance alcove. He cut the chain with a stolen field tool, kicked the drum onto its side, and shoved it hard along the walkway. The drum rolled toward the half-closed shutters, struck them with a booming crash, and bounced into the threshold. The noise forced the teams on the far side to react early. One guard leaned out to see the obstruction. Another shifted to clear it. Silas moved in that instant. He took Mira through the side alcove instead of the main line, ducked beneath a hanging relay bundle, and slipped through a narrow technician's hatch beside the shutter channel. A stun shot burst where they had been a second earlier. The hatch dropped them into a cramped inspection crawl that ran inside the wall of the communication spine. They pressed on through the crawl until it widened near a relay service node the size of a small room. Here the signal spine met the local station channels that fed alerts, chamber feeds, dispatch, and internal timing. Not a full external broadcast point, but close enough to matter. A side door hissed open and a man in a stained maintenance jacket stumbled in, with a handheld scanner clutched against his chest. All three froze. He was middle-aged, thin, and visibly terrified, but not uselessly so. The scanner in his hand was real equipment, and the access band at his wrist carried lower technical clearance. "I'm not with them," he said quickly. "If I were with them, I would have come with more people." Silas did not lower his stance. "Name? Corvin Hale, Senior Relay Technician, South Ring Maintenance." Mira narrowed her eyes. "Why are you here?" "Hale Suvalovit. Because 2 hours ago, security took my team off this sector and ordered us to sign a false maintenance record. They wanted us to certify that a system purge had removed all non-council freight dependencies from the forum. It had not. I refused. My supervisor signed it anyway." Silas studied him. The man had the posture of someone who had obeyed institutions for most of his life and had just discovered that the institution would crush him too. He was not here to perform courage. He was here because staying silent now would bury him with a lie. "What do you want?" Silas asked. "To survive would be nice," Hale said, then steadied himself. "But more than that, I want what is true to outlive whatever they say after this." That was enough to keep listening. Hale stepped closer to the relay cabinet. "The treaty is not the real move. It is the legal wrapper. They want the signature so they can claim emergency authority over the border lanes. Once they have that, they can place council fleet oversight on relief traffic and cargo escorts moving between Earth colonies. That gives them the supply arteries without declaring war." Mira went still. Hale had just filled in the point. He kept going. There were old records tied to the frontier shortages 3 years ago. Missing escorts, delayed medical runs, and piracy warnings that never matched actual wreck locations. Those records were flagged for destruction this morning. Not archive transfer. Destruction. Someone is cleaning evidence. Evidence of what? Silas asked. Of the council shaping the border crisis in advance, Hale said. They tightened convoy timing, let shortages deepen, and then used the instability to justify intervention. He forced himself to keep going. If they control the routes now, they can call it rescue. If the old records survive, it becomes planned pressure. He looked between them. That is the simple version. They want control over the frontier supply lanes, and they want the paper trail gone before anyone can prove the crisis was helped along. There it was. The second layer. The surrender treaty was not cover for peace. It was cover for control of the supply lines, backed by a crisis the council had been helping shape for years. If the evidence vanished and the treaty stood, Earth would lose practical control over its frontier life, one convoy at a time under the language of lawful protection. Silas said it in the shortest form possible. If the truth dies here, the border stops being ours. Mira nodded once. Hale looked grimly relieved to hear someone say it without softening it. Silas turned to the relay cabinet. Can this node reach the internal chamber feeds? Not cleanly, Hale said, but it can reach dispatch mirrors and archive transit if the upper commissioners have not hard-cut the trunk. Then we do not need clean. We need a breach. Every light in the room snapped to red. A new voice filled the speaker grid, older than Voss and heavy with authority. This is Commissioner Solen Vey. By emergency decree, Aster Vale Forum is now under full sovereign containment. All civilian routes are suspended. All unauthorized transmissions are criminal acts. Security Director Voss has full authority to neutralize hostile interference. Hale's face drained. Solen Vey. Mira looked at Silas. So that is the hand above Voss. The speaker continued. Current evidence indicates a coordinated Earth attempt to sabotage sovereign infrastructure, abduct protected personnel, and disrupt lawful treaty proceedings. Voss had moved to the next stage. He was not only chasing them now. He was building the story that would remain when the doors reopened. Earth saboteur, violent breach, council victim. Hale got them through 2 locked relay doors using an old technician's override, but the route was already shrinking. The corridor beyond sloped toward docking ring 7, used for courier craft and maintenance tenders. That gave Silas a reason to go there. Docking rings always held signal repeaters, manifest relays, and emergency channel mirrors. If any line still had a path beyond the station, it would likely touch one of those systems before leaving the hull. Docking ring 7, Hale said. There is a transfer concourse and a courier relay cabinet near the tender bays. Can it transmit off station? Mira asked. Only in narrow packets if central control has not stripped the privilege. Uncertainty was all that remained. A narrow packet was better than honest silence. They descended through a cable stair and came out into a service passage that ran parallel to the docking ring. Through narrow inspection windows, Silas could see the outer concourse beyond. Shutters had sealed half the storefronts. Guidance beacons strobed across the floor, and a handful of station workers were being moved at weapon point toward a holding zone near the tender gates. Mira slowed and pressed a hand to her side. The pain was catching up. Silas took her weight for a few steps while Hale keyed the next service hatch. He did not finish the sequence. A stun burst hit the panel beside his hand and blew the tool from his grip. Security teams spilled into the far end of the service passage at the exact same moment the shutters on the concourse side began to rise. Voss had read the route correctly. He appeared on the concourse beyond the inspection glass, not in armor and not rushing, just walking with that same controlled focus as if the whole ring were another room he intended to dominate by tone alone. Behind him stood guards in layered formation, and, farther back, a hollow display already building a public incident file with red markers and Earth insignia. Silas understood the trap at once. The service passage was the kill funnel, and the concourse was the witness stage. Voss would drive them out under cameras, frame them as armed infiltrators, and let Commissioner Vey turn that image into law. Voss's voice came through the concourse grid. Silas Wren, you are under formal council accusation for sabotage, unlawful detention of station personnel, and violent interference with treaty proceedings. Release your accomplices and stand down. So he knew the name. He used your real name on an open channel, Mira said. Yes. Hale looked between them. Who are you? Silas answered without drama. Not just the man they invited to sign. That was enough. The public mask had broken. This was the moment the diplomat died and the real objective took over. If the council wanted a public story, Silas had to get the truth into the same public air. Silas made his decision immediately. Hale, get to the courier relay cabinet. Through what? Through the concourse. That is where the signal path is. He tore the emergency release lever from the service hatch and rammed it into the conduit latch beside the window strip. The tempered panel fractured, then burst outward into the concourse with a shower of bright shards and alarm tones. Workers screamed and dropped low. Guards on the far side flinched in the wrong direction for half a second, their attention pulled to the broken glass and the civilians at once. That half second was the opening. Silas drove through it first and struck the nearest guard before the man could recover his aim. He did not stay to finish. He took the weapon line off center, shoved the guard into a second one, and opened a lane. Hale now. The technician sprinted from the service breach and ran low toward the courier relay cabinet near the tender bays. Mira came after him slower, using an overturned service card as moving cover. Stun fire cracked across the concourse. One burst hit the relay cabinet housing and scorched the side panel, but Hale reached it and ripped the maintenance cover open. Voss did not retreat. He kept walking forward, eyes on Silas, like a man coming to inspect damage he already planned to classify. The line is damaged, but not dead, Hale shouted. I can send one compressed archive burst. Do it, Silas said. Mira grabbed a drop field emitter and rolled it across the deck. It burst into a pulse screen of static glare, enough to blind tracking for a breath. Hale slammed his scanner lead into the relay cabinet. The console displayed a line that read, "External packet path unstable." "Send anyway," Mira shouted. He did. The cabinet groaned under the illegal load. Somewhere in the ring above them, a courier mast rotated half a degree off assigned position. Then Voss changed tactics. He pointed not at Silas or Hale, but at the tender bay control behind them. A guard fired. The shot hit the local pressure lock control instead. Emergency shutters dropped between Hale and the outer mast line, severing the packet route in mid-burst. Transmission cut. Hale shouted, but not before something had gone out. He could not prove how much, only that the line had been open for a moment. That moment cost them dearly. A second team hit the concourse from the side access. Hale was knocked away from the cabinet and slid across the floor, scanner spinning from his hand. Mira tried to reach him, but two guards closed the gap and forced her back behind the ruined service cart. Voss looked down at her wrist display and spoke to his nearest men, but the ring acoustics carried enough. Tag the relay breach to Wren. Mark the technician as coerced. Separate the witness. Separate the witness. Mira. Silas, move at once. He crossed the last meters in a straight line, slammed one guard off balance, and dragged Mira clear just before a restraint net fired into the space where she had been. The net struck the cart instead and cinched around twisted metal. Two more stun bursts flashed across the deck. One clipped the relay cabinet, and another struck the service breach behind them. Hale! Mira called. He was alive, pinned behind a low cargo pallet, but cut off from them by converging guards. They had reached the relay. They had sent at least part of the truth. But the route was broken. Hale was stranded, and the docking ring was sealing into a controlled crime scene built for the Council's version of events. Go! Hale shouted. I opened a side freight crawl behind Tender Bay 4. It links to upper maintenance. Come with us. Mira called. Hale gave a short, bleak laugh. I am already on too many recordings. Silas understood. If he tried to pull Hale through that many guns, all three would be buried inside the ring. The man had bought them a line and a direction. Nothing more could be taken without losing everything. Silas seized Myra's arm and drove toward Tender Bay 4 as the shutters dropped sector by sector behind them. He tore open the freight crawl grill Hale had indicated and shoved Mira through first. Then he turned for one final glance. Voss stood in the middle of the damaged concourse with the red incident grid floating beside him, already rewriting the event in live notation. Hale was on his knees with two guards over him. The relay cabinet smoked. The holding zone workers stared from behind their barrier with the look of people who had just watched truth and power collide and could not yet tell which one would survive the day. Silas ducked into the crawl just as the outer shutter slammed shut. Inside the narrow metal tunnel, the sounds of the concourse became dull and distant. We lost Hale, Mira said. Yes. We do not know how much of the archive got out. No. She looked at him in the dim service light. You were never just a diplomat. Silas met her gaze and did not try to soften the truth. No. Below them, Aster Vale Forum kept moving in broken rhythm. Somewhere outside the crawl, the council had his name, his role, and their story prepared. Somewhere farther out, maybe only a fragment of Hale's packet was still flying through unstable lines toward open space. For the moment, they had lost more than they had gained. Their clean way out was gone, their witness was captured, and the council's accusation had gone public. But something had escaped the ring, even if only in pieces, and pieces were enough to build a counterstroke if he stayed alive long enough to use them. Silas started upward through the crawl. They had been beaten in the middle of the station. Not finished, just beaten. That was different. Silas Wren no longer had a clean exit, so he chose a harder objective. If he kept running, the council would close the station, blame Earth, and write the whole event back into their own version of order. He would make Aster Vale Forum itself testify. The freight crawl above. Tender Bay 4 was narrow, hot, and lined with old service conduits that rattled every time the station shifted load between sectors. Silas moved first, Mira selmed behind him, both climbing toward upper maintenance through a tunnel never meant for dignified people. Below them, docking Ring 7 was already being arranged into a public crime scene. Somewhere down there, Turin Voss was staging witnesses, reports, and timing. Somewhere beyond him, Solin Vey was preparing to turn the whole event into lawful proof that Earth had come to the Forum in bad faith. Silas stopped at the first inspection hatch and listened before he opened it. He heard no boots nearby, only the low pulse of ventilation fans and the deeper rhythm of pressure gates sealing in sequence farther along the ring. Mira braced one hand against the wall and caught her breath. If you're thinking about the outer hall, stop. I am not. Good, because I am done crawling toward impossible exits. He opened the hatch into upper maintenance. The space beyond was dimmer than the lower maintenance levels, but cleaner, better monitored, and closer to the administrative heart of the station. Cable trunks ran overhead in armored channels. Floor strips glowed with emergency routing markers that had begun to contradict each other. The relay pulse and the lockdown orders were still fighting for authority in the same machine. Silas stepped out first, scanned the corridor, then helped Mira down beside him. "We are not leaving quietly anymore," he said. She looked at him for a beat. "Then say the rest." We turned the station into the evidence. That was the reset. They were no longer trying to vanish through service routes before Council security finished closing the map. From this point on, the goal was to make the Forum itself reveal how far the Council had bent law, protocol, and infrastructure to seize control of human supply lanes. That required more than survival. It required a visible contradiction the Council could not bury without damaging its own authority. Silas cracked the side panel of a local terminal and pulled up a stripped-down sector map. He was not looking for a route out now, but for the pattern of Voss's control. There it was. Rings within rings. Voss had prioritized short closures, inner choke points, and jurisdiction overlap, a method designed to intercept movement without forcing Vey to declare. A full public military takeover. Efficient, quiet, and politically survivable, which meant he would avoid any choice that made him look like he had lost the middle of the station outright. Silas pointed to a service spine crossing the map. He is keeping a priority corridor open between Central Command, the Witness Review Vault, and the Interchamber Dispatch Hub. Mira leaned closer. Because he still thinks he can manage this as a contained incident. And because if he closes that line, he admits he no longer controls the middle. They reached the upper utility deck through a pressure lock that had not yet been switched to armed guard access. That told Silas he was right. Voss had committed most of his field teams downward and outward, trying to sweep and stage the lower sectors while keeping the administrative middle neat enough for Vey's narrative. At the next junction, Silas found a sealed emergency trolley dock with a yellow maintenance capsule still locked inside. He keyed it open, hauled out the portable override unit fixed to the wall mount, and passed the med patch reservoir to Mira. "Take the rest now," he said. "I hate that tone. It means I need you standing for the next hour." She took it anyway. "That tone also means you already chose the next bad idea." "Yes." Silas used the override unit to trip a local emergency logistics rehearsal in 2 adjoining sectors. In a real crisis, the procedure would reopen selected corridor controls to let medical and pressure teams bypass ornamental traffic routes. Voss had likely left those permissions intact because shutting them down completely would look terrible in an audit and could strand actual station personnel in danger. He had counted on no one beneath commissioner rank knowing how to trigger them from maintenance. That was his mistake. The utility deck lights changed from red to alternating amber and white. Farther down the station, 2 bulkhead sequences reversed. Lift priority shifted. A side corridor that had been hard sealed clicked open long enough to accept emergency traffic tags. Mira stared at the map strip as new paths bloomed. You just bent his closure pattern sideways. I used the station's own crisis rules. He is going to be furious. Good. Furious people answer quickly. They crossed into the newly opened corridor before the permission window expired. Behind them, 3 sealed doors cycled shut again. But not before 2 security teams on the far side had been redirected to the wrong sectors by the altered emergency routing. Voss's method depended on smooth compartment control. Silas had just forced the compartments to argue with each other. At the next turn, a voice snapped through the speaker grid, sharper now and stripped of diplomatic polish. Who authorized medical corridor rehearsal? Voss. Silas let the silence hang before he answered. Your station did. The speaker clicked again. You are improvising with systems you do not understand. Silas kept walking. No, I am improvising with systems you understand too well to shut down. That one landed. 2 seconds later, the corridor lights dimmed as Voss tried to cut local authority and reclaim command. But in doing so, he had to push a visible override against emergency safety procedure. Every such override was logged somewhere, even if those logs later vanished. The route Voss had accidentally exposed led them toward the interchamber dispatch level. That layer sat between the public council halls and the station's sovereign command core. This was where messages, archival approvals, witness transfers, and chamber feed priorities were handled before anything became official. They entered through a service alcove behind a row of sealed dispatch booths. The corridor ahead was broad, clean, and almost silent. A thin glass wall overlooked a central dispatch chamber where dozens of suspended screens normally handled chamber feed assignment and document relay. Most were dark now. A few still glowed with incident markers, security route changes, and packet denial flags. Near the far end stood 2 armed guards and a woman in deep gray council uniform, her posture rigid enough to cut the room in half. Silas recognized her at once. Commissioner Solène Vey had finally stepped into the visible center. She was older than Voss and carried power differently. Voss shaped rooms by refinement and implied control. Vey shaped them by making everyone else feel late to her decisions. She stood with both hands behind her back, studying a floating incident board that already showed a simplified sequence of the docking ring breach. Earth infiltrator, hostile technician coercion, and damage to sovereign relay property. The lie had structure now. Silas and Mira remained in shadow long enough to see Voss arrive from the opposite corridor. He walked directly to Vey, stopped, and spoke in a tone that did not carry. Silas could not hear the words, but he could read enough from posture. Voss was explaining delays. Vey was not pleased. Mira whispered, he had to come upstairs, because the lie is getting heavy. Silas stepped from the service alcove before Mira could object. He entered the glass-lined corridor in plain sight, stripped of envoy insignia and carrying none of the false diplomacy he had worn earlier. Both guards turned. He did it for a reason. Hidden movement would only make him another shadow in Voss's report. Here he needed Vey to hear him directly, and he needed Voss to react in front of her. Voss pivoted at once. Vey did not move for half a second, which told Silas she had not expected boldness so close to her own level. Commissioner, Silas said, voice calm enough to travel. You should hear the truth from someone who is still willing to say it without editing. Voss stepped into the line between them. Do not indulge him. He wants a performance. Silas looked only at Vey. He wants control more than truth. That is why he is failing. Explain, Vey said. Silas did, not in a speech, but in a chain of plain facts. You accelerated the treaty because the station still depends on a freight layer Earth can touch. You buried Miracellin off record because she knew it. You moved to blame Earth for sabotage because you needed legal cover before taking the border lanes under emergency protection. And you are destroying Frontier archive links because those links show the shortages were shaped, not accidental. Voss answered first. You are reciting speculation stolen from coerced personnel. If it were speculation, Silas said, you would have let the relay record stand. Vey's gaze sharpened. Do you imagine that saying these things inside my station changes the law? No, I imagine your station changes it for me. For the first time, Voss stepped closer than protocol allowed. Commissioner, this ends if we cut central dispatch and clear the level. Silas heard the flaw at once. Voss was offering the ugly solution because he felt his neat one slipping. Cut dispatch. Black out the level. Reset the story later. Vey heard weakness. Can you still contain this without crippling chamber command? She asked. A pause. Small and deadly. Yes, Voss said. He answered too quickly. Silas backed one step toward the service alcove. "If I fail," he said to Vey, "you will still know what this station was built on." Then he moved. The guards surged into the alcove, but Mira had already pulled the emergency trolley loose from its wall brace. She slammed it sideways into the leading guard's knees, buying Silas the half-second he needed to drop the dispatch booth shutters with a portable override. Glass panels sealed in staggered sequence between the alcove and the central chamber, not enough to lock Vey in, but enough to break direct pursuit and flood the level with emergency route conflict. The whole deck shuddered as dispatch permissions split across two competing authority trees. Silas and Mira ran. They escaped into an archive transfer tunnel that curved away from dispatch level toward the Sovereign broadcast spine. This was a deeper route now, closer to the station's last protected transmission core. It was the most dangerous path left in the station because it ran close to the place where Vey's final authority and the Forum's last unbroken transmission lines met. But it was also the only place where Silas could force and ending the council could not tidy. Mira leaned against the wall once they cleared the first bend. That was not a conversation. That was a declaration. It needed to be. You wanted her to hear the fear in Voss. Yes. He spread the override unit open beside the cracked relay map he had copied from the dispatch level. The picture was incomplete, but now it was enough. He did not need to destroy Aster Vale Forum. Destruction would help the council. He had to keep the station alive long enough to speak while forcing the hidden systems, the emergency overrides, and the sovereign channels to expose one another under pressure. Mira followed the logic at once. You want the chamber feeds, the dispatch logs, and the freight layer to collide in one visible event. Yes. A status panel blinked awake and displayed a line that read, "Final chamber cycle begins in 16 minutes." That was the clock. Vey would finish closing the official record when the cycle ended. Voss would finish shaping the crime scene before then. If Silas failed to force the truth into the live bones of the station inside that window, Earth would leave Aster Vale Forum branded as the traitor. He took the override unit, offered Mira a hand, and led her deeper into the tunnel toward the Sovereign broadcast spine. The last phase had begun. Silas Wren had 16 minutes to force a station built for power to tell the truth about power. The Sovereign broadcast spine lay behind 3 sealed control chambers and a wall of polished alloy. It was the private nerve line beneath the treaty hall, where the station decided what became a message and what disappeared. Silas and Mira reached the last maintenance threshold through the archive transfer tunnel. Both were breathing hard. Myra's side was still banded tight, and Silas's hands were cut from metal edges and forced locks. But neither slowed when the final service panel came into view. A small status screen beside the panel displayed a line that read Central Chamber Cycle closes in 14 minutes. The time was thinning fast. Silas opened the panel and exposed the inner relay block. The Sovereign spine was still live. That mattered more than anything else. If Vey had truly panicked, she would have killed the whole trunk. She had not. She still needed the station to appear lawful, functional, and in command. That decision was the last opening Silas intended to use. Once I open the Sovereign relay, Voss will come fast, he said. He was already coming, Mira replied. Faster. She crossed to a manual pressure wheel beside the backup cooling gate. Then tell me what to hold. Keep the spine alive. No matter what. That was her role now. If the cooling balance failed, the spine would auto-throttle and the station would silence itself in the name of self-protection. If that happened, they would regain control. If the trunk stayed live, the station's own records could keep speaking faster than the council could bury them. Silas keyed the old civilian handshake into the access frame. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the relay block recognized the buried architecture and shifted from public lockout to disputed authority. The corridor lights turned white. Somewhere above them, deep through the station core, chamber feeds, dispatch mirrors, cargo timing, and emergency log records all reconnected to the same live trunk. That was why opening the Sovereign trunk mattered. It pulled the station's separated truths onto one line where they could collide in public view. At the far end of the corridor, an iris door snapped open and Turin Voss entered with 4 security officers in field gray. He was no longer pretending to preserve ceremony. His jacket was gone, his sidearm was drawn, and the last layer of refinement had been burned off by pressure. "You chose the most expensive possible ending," Voss said. Silas stepped between him and the open relay housing. "No, you did, when you decided the truth was cheaper to bury than to survive." Voss saw at once. If the Sovereign trunk stayed open while the old freight layer, the dispatch logs, the emergency overrides, and the altered accusation record all spoke at once, the station's own systems would begin contradicting the council narrative in real time. "Step away from the relay," Voss said. "You cannot kill the trunk without proving I was right." Behind Silas, Mira opened the cooling gate half a turn. The Sovereign's spine deepened to a stronger hum. Voss heard it and understood the other danger. "If that line overloads, this sector burns." "No," Mira said. "If it overloads, the station protects itself. That is why you left the safeties intact. Commissioner Vey needs the forum standing when she tells her story." Voss's eyes flicked to her once. That was enough. Silas used the beat to access the first packet group. He did not open a speech channel. He opened records. A dispatch mirror above the corridor lit up. Then a second. Then a third. First came Miracel's erased chamber assignment and the off-record detention transfer that had removed her from the treaty registry before the emergency decree began. Then came the station's internal safety log showing local emergency rehearsals triggered after Voss had already sealed civilian routes. Then came the lower freight handshake, recognized as an old civilian architecture layer mark during Earth contract years, still live inside the forum's core transport net. The officers behind Voss saw it. More importantly, so did every linked review console still open in adjacent command sectors. "False insertions," Voss said. "Cut the mirrors." One officer obeyed and fired at the nearest floating screen. The screen died. 2 others came alive in its place. Voss raised a sidearm and fired past Silas into the cooling gate housing. The shot hit the wheel assembly, not Mira, but the impact knocked the gate half shut. The Sovereign trunk whined and began to throttle. Mira lunged, caught the wheel with both hands, and forced it back open despite the pain tearing through her side. That was the moment that broke the room. Not the gunshot, not the mirrors. The fact that Voss had just fired at station cooling inside the Sovereign relay corridor while the system was live and recording. He had tried to silence the trunk by damaging the very safety system that kept it lawful and stable. That was the fatal mistake. In one shot, he changed from the man controlling the scene to part of the evidence inside it. Silas sent the second packet. This one contained the clean braid. Myra's detention, the erased registry, the freight dependency, the early archive destruction orders, the manipulated convoy logs, the pre-written emergency authority language, Vey's Sovereign cut attempt, and Voss's fire against the cooling gate. All of it was time-stamped, linked, and impossible to describe as one isolated act of sabotage. The mirror field above the corridor multiplied, not because Silas ordered flourish, but because the station's own review logic had begun spawning witness copies faster than Voss could suppress them. The machine was no longer choosing silence. It was choosing preservation. Voss took one step forward, then stopped. He understood at last that any shot he fired now would only add another layer to the record. The console above the Sovereign trunk displayed a line that read, "External review handshake accepted." Something had connected beyond the station. Maybe Hale's damage packet had survived long enough to prime outside attention. Maybe some external review body had seen the contradictions and forced an audit path. Either way, the balance had changed in an instant. The forum was no longer speaking only to itself. An outside line was now open, and Voss could no longer close the scene and rewrite it as an internal matter. Silas sent the final packet. When the send bar cleared, the station gave a soft, confirming tone almost too small for such a large ending. It was done. From somewhere beyond the corridor came a change in sound. Not more pursuit. Less. Doors that had been sealing now paused. Alarm tones stepped down from emergency red to review amber. The station was shifting from suppression to audit. That was the real turn. The first team through the corridor after the send was not Voss's security unit. It was an internal oversight detachment from the Chamber Review Office, the kind of people the council liked to treat as furniture until legal risk became personal. They arrived with sealed orders, portable record vaults, and no interest in anyone's pride. One officer saw Voss, the lit sovereign console, the linked evidence chain still crawling across the mirror field, and asked for custody authority. They arrived a breath later and tried once to hold the room. This sector remains under commissioner command. The oversight officer answered without deference. Not while live sovereign contradictions remain unresolved. That was the fracture. Small, precise, and fatal to her control. The treaty session above never resumed. The surrender framework for Earth's border colonies was frozen pending investigation. The frontier convoy records were seized before destruction. Hale was recovered alive from docking ring 7 and moved into protected technical hold before Vay's office could reach him again. Voss was removed from station command before his wrists were even freed from the restraint loop. Earth was not declared victorious. Institutions almost never said things that honestly. But the balance had changed. Hours later, when the upper cloud bands of Nerith Prime had turned from bronze to dark iron beyond the view panels, Silas stood in a quiet recovery berth overlooking the station's outer ring. Mira sat nearby with a real medical unit on her side, and color slowly returning to her face. They will try to survive this, she said. Yes. They will call it one commissioner's overreach, one director's corruption, local failure. Yes. And Earth. Earth keeps its lanes for now. That answer was honest and incomplete. They had stopped this station from swallowing the truth, but not the larger shape behind it. A soft chime came from the berth console. The screen displayed a line that read unregistered freight query received from outer relay source. Silas stepped closer. The message contained only one line of plain text. We saw what got out. There are other stations built on the same hidden layer. Mira read it and went very still. That was not part of Aster Vale. Not the same case. This story had closed enough to stand on its own, but the message opened a wider map beyond the station they had just survived. Silas looked out through the berth glass toward the distant traffic lanes threading past Nerith Prime. Earth had not won by hitting harder than the Council. It had won because it understood which hidden routes mattered when systems could be bent without being broken, and how long the truth needed to stay alive to outrun authority. Beyond the station, the traffic lights kept moving in patient lines through the dark. Somewhere out there, another structure was already waiting. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more long-form space stories like this one. Your support truly helps this channel grow, and it helps keep stories like this alive. Until the next transmission, stay curious, stay strong, and keep looking to the stars.